The return of the sword, the conquest of Mecca. January 630 AD. The desert night was ablaze. 10,000 campfires burned across the valley of Maru Zahran, casting a terrifying, flickering glow against the dark mountains. It was the largest army the Arabian Peninsula had ever seen. The Muslims had returned. Standing amidst the sea of fire, looking out toward the dark horizon, was a man who understood the bitter irony of this moment better than anyone else. Khalid ibn al-Walid was coming home. Years ago, he had been the golden child of the Quraysh, the aristocratic cavalry commander who had devastated the Muslim army at the Battle of Uhud. He had fought fiercely to keep the Prophet out of Mecca. Now he stood in the vanguard of the Prophet's army, the vanguard of a massive, unstoppable machine, carrying the title Sayfullah, the sword of Allah. The Quraysh had broken the Treaty of Hudaybiyyah, and the time for diplomacy was dead. The psychological warfare had already begun. The 10,000 fires were a calculated display of overwhelming power, designed to shatter the morale of Mecca before a single sword was drawn. It worked. The Quraishi leadership surrendered. But a city is not just its politicians. There were proud, bitter men in Mecca who would rather see their city burn than bow to the army at their gates. The Prophet Muhammad issued a strict, unyielding order. There is to be no bloodshed. You will not strike unless struck first. You will enter in peace. To ensure total control, the Prophet divided the army into 4 columns, executing a masterclass in urban envelopment. They would pour into the city simultaneously from the north, south, east, and west. No one could escape. No one could mount a unified defense. The Prophet gave the most volatile assignment to Khalid. He was ordered to command the right flank, entering from the south, the lower part of Mecca. It was the steepest, most rugged route, and tactically the most likely place for die-hard insurgents to set an ambush. As dawn broke, the 4 columns began their descent. Khalid rode at the head of his heavily armed cavalry, moving down the narrow, rocky defiles toward the southern gates. His eyes scanned the ridges. He knew the terrain. He had played in these canyons as a boy. He also knew the men waiting for him. The silence of the morning was shattered by the whistle of arrows. At the hill of Khandama, a band of Quraishi extremists had gathered. They were led by Ikrimah ibn Abi Jahl and Safwan ibn Umayyah, Khalid's old friends, the men he used to drink with and fight alongside. They refused the amnesty. They blocked the narrow pass, drawing their swords and raining arrows down upon the Muslim column. Khalid halted. The Prophet's order echoed in his mind. Do not fight unless attacked. The arrows thudding into Muslim shields provided the answer. The condition had been met. Khalid ibn al-Walid was no longer a diplomat. He was a weapon unsealed. He did not negotiate, and he did not hesitate. Khalid understood that in urban warfare, momentum is everything. If the vanguard stalled in a narrow pass, the column would be bottlenecked and chewed to pieces. He needed to break them immediately. With a roar, Khalid unsheathed his scimitar and ordered the charge. The Muslim cavalry surged up the rocky incline. It was not a prolonged battle. It was a devastating surgical strike. Khalid hit the Quraishi blockade with the speed and violence of a thunderbolt. The heavy clash of steel rang through the southern quarters of Mecca, but it lasted mere minutes. The insurgents, expecting a hesitant approach, were entirely overwhelmed by the sheer ferocity of the counterattack. About 12 to 13 Quraishi fighters were killed in the brutal melee, while the Muslims lost only 2 or 3 men who had strayed too far forward. Seeing the sheer, unstoppable mass of Khalid's cavalry cutting through their lines, Ikrimah and Safwan realized the futility of their stand. The resistance shattered. The insurgents dropped their weapons and fled into the alleys and surrounding mountains. Khalid wiped the blood from his blade and reined in his horse. He did not order a pursuit. He did not let his men pillage or hunt down the survivors. The objective was the city, not a massacre. He reformed his lines with iron discipline and continued the march. The southern gate was broken. The last resistance of the ancient regime had been swept away by one of its own sons. Khalid marched his column through the streets, the rhythmic thud of hooves echoing against the empty houses. He converged with the other 3 columns at the center of the city, right at the steps of the Kaaba. The envelopment was complete. The city was taken with barely a drop of blood. As Khalid watched the Prophet approach the Kaaba to smash the hundreds of idols surrounding it, the weight of the moment settled upon him. He had left Mecca a pagan aristocrat fighting to defend idols of stone. He returned as a conqueror, standing shoulder to shoulder with the very men he had once tried to destroy, securing the holiest site in Islam. The sword of Allah had cut the final cord to his past. The Arabian Peninsula was now firmly in their grasp, but looking out past the city walls toward the vast empires of Rome and Persia, Khalid knew his wars were only just beginning.